You're watching RTE1.
Ladies and gentlemen, to whom it concerns, it's The Late Late Show. And here is your host, Gay Byrne.
All right. There is no need for rowdyism before we go any further with person watching the Late Late Show tonight somewhere around this country is going to be the winner of a brand new Opel Corsa. There she is, three-door city model in Caribbean blue. As I told you last week, this car has more safety features than any other car in its class. Side impact protection beams, front and rear seat belts, seat belt tensioners, height-adjustable front and rear seat belts, impact-absorbing collision zones, front and rear, also that pollen filter, which is a great sales point for anybody with a touch of the chest ailments. There's an air recirculation system, a 6-speaker stereo radio cassette, a digital clock, a 5-speed gearbox, and a catalytic converter built straight in. And the rear seats, as I told you last week, because there was some doubt about it, fold down to give you even more room for packing in luggage. And it comes with a retail value of £9,320. That's it. But first, of course, we have to draw the card from the box. It has to be the right answer, and then you have to answer a question on the telephone, so stay tuned. Ladies and gentlemen, did you know that our very own Frank McNamara, musical director of the Late Late Show, Frank McNamara happens to be the only person to arrange 2 consecutive winners in the history of the Eurovision Song Contest. Last year for Linda Martin, and this year for Neil Kavanagh. How about that? Did you know that? That's it. That's it. He also happens to be the producer of the first release for our next guest. She's in show business since she was 12. Her first solo single will be released in Ireland on Monday and in England the following week. And it's a grand little song, and it's called Everybody's Got to Learn Sometime. Will you welcome, please, Patricia Rowe. Patricia Rowe, everybody gotta learn sometime. A nice little choreography there by Mavis Ascot and produced and arranged by our own Frank McNamara. Now, brown bread, war, the commitments, the snapper, the van. This guy is on a high roll, a real high roll at the moment. He just cannot be stopped. And the last time he was with us, he said that he would never give up the teaching job. But this week, he's announced that he's giving up the teaching job. Would you welcome, please, Mr. Roddy Doyle from Barrytown. Barrytown, there you are. Sit down. So, why are we giving up the day job then?
Life has become very complicated since I
Was
made that
last with us.
statement, yeah.
Yes.
At the time, I wasn't convinced that I could make a full-time living as a writer, and I'm now convinced that I can. And I was unmarried, I think, but I didn't have any children, and now I do. So I didn't have life at that stage was very simple. I came home at 4:30, and I could write for a couple of hours, and the rest of the day was free. But with the kids now, I can't do that anymore. So. As well as which, I think it was, but I went back to school last September, quite happily going back, but sometime about 3 or 4 weeks into the term, I decided I wasn't really enjoying it anymore. It had become a bit repetitive. So luckily, I can do something else instead.
Yeah.
So I'm...
You've had a fantastic run so far. Will you miss the teaching, by the way?
Not initially, no. I mean, at this time of year, I'm always looking forward to the holidays anyway. I suspect perhaps sometime in October, November, I might miss it a bit, because if nothing else, it gets you out of the house, you know, and teaching... It's the type of job where you actually encounter several hundred people a day, you know, and I'm not the most outgoing of people at the best of times, so I'll miss that, I'm sure. But
You'll miss the crack and the slagging as well.
yeah,
you do get a fair amount of slagging, don't you?
Yeah, not recently, mind you.
No, not recently.
Not recently, but I used to get a fair amount, all right. But I think they take me for granted now, so
Yeah.
it's about time I got out.
Yeah, but kids are great in the things they say, and they pull you down.
Yeah, kids. I find girls particularly, they're not sometimes as obviously funny as boys, but they're easier to teach, but they're difficult to control. And you know, for example, there was one time I was having problems controlling a class. It'd be years ago now. I don't have these problems anymore. But I let out a roar out of me, and this young one at the front says, "No need to shout," you know. So. That type of thing, and they interrupt beautifully as well. When particularly, I find I'm much happier teaching English than geography. I find geography a bit of a chore these days. But you're trying to explain the significance of granite or something like that, and some young one will say at the front again, "I love your jumper." You know? Did your wife buy it? No. Who bought it? You know, I bought it. He bought it himself. Jesus. You know, this type of thing, and there was one. The best of all was when I was I think I was teaching geography, and this young one at the back put her hand up, and I said yes. She says, "If you're married, how come you don't have any babies?" Right in the middle of I think I was talking about traffic congestion or something like that. So how do you answer that question?
Well, how did you answer that?
I didn't. I told her to shut up. Because it's actually a very difficult question to answer, you know.
Yes, yeah. You're a great man for the repartee.
Yeah,
Shut up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Paddy Clark, Ha Ha Ha, is the name of your latest book now. Mm-hmm. This is set in
1968, 69, thereabouts,
yes.
Yeah.
One thing I have to establish straight away, there's very little bad language in it.
Yeah, well, I've never used...
For which you are renowned,
yes, I'm famous for it. But no, when I say with the van particularly, it was full of foul language because the central character, Jimmy Rabbit Senior, the father, was a man who laced his language with, you know, bad words, so to speak. Now, Paddy Clark has grown up at a time when bad language was really bad. And he uses it now and again, but it's much more significant. It's not loose. He rarely would use it, and if he uses it, he looks over his shoulder to make sure there's no adults around. But in 1968, in my memory, bad language, as we know it, was really, really bad with a capital B, so there's very little of it in the book. It wouldn't fit. It would be wrong to stick it in there.
Yes. It's a major change, isn't it, since then? Bad language was not used.
Yeah, well, if I remember correctly now, it was street language. It was the type of language you used with your friends, but the minute you got in the door, I mean, you left it outside on the step until you were going out again. You wouldn't dare use bad language in the house, but I think it's become less bad. And that divide between what you say in the house and what you say in the street has disappeared to a certain extent.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes the first words kids say now is not mama or dada, but something a bit
Whatever.
bluer, you know.
Indeed.
And I think in many ways, it might sound hypocritical, but in many ways it's a pity, because I do think it robs language of its a lot of its subtlety and power. And as well as which, I think there are occasions when I want to use bad language, but because, you know, if only to get rid of frustration or anger or something like that. But bad language isn't really there's very few words left that are really bad.
Yes.
So what you want to do when you really want to use a bad word, we're running out of bad words, you know.
Yeah. Do you find children harder to teach now than they were when you started?
No, funnily I don't.
No?
I've read an awful lot about how I should be, and at this stage I should have been stabbed at least 3 times. But no, I don't find them harder. The one thing I would say, it's a rather undramatic thing that I do find harder, is getting them to talk. Funnily enough, you know, would have thought it'd be the opposite. But I remember if you asked a question of the class, say in English, something about poetry or that, a couple of years ago, hands would have gone up immediately. But now it's actually, kids are more reluctant to talk, I think. I've no idea. I don't really know. Maybe they're bored.
Yeah.
I don't honestly know.
Yeah.
It seems...
Sorry, go on.
I end up usually picking on the 3 or 4 people, and the same 3 or 4 people all the time, who will give me, you know,
talkers.
something
You
to
weren't getting close, Roddy, to burnout in teaching, were you?
No, I don't think so.
It is a burnout
I
profession.
could have done, I suppose. I do think, yes, it is a burnout profession. I think I could have done, but I always knew that I was there because I wanted to. Financially, I think I could have left it a few years ago. I was earning enough from the writing. So I was never there for money. I was never there to, you know, bring home the bacon or anything like that. So I think because I always knew that if I wanted to give up, I could when I wanted to. I didn't feel that 7-year itch, or I've been there 14 years, so I never felt that urge to get out. But it can be quite an exhausting job. I think it's become more complicated since I went to school. When I went to school, the teachers called you by your surname. They taught you for 40 minutes. They never knew anything about you. Getting into university, even if it was quite easy. I think I needed 10 points to do arts in UCD. I think I'd need twice as many now, you know. So I think teachers now are supposed to be social workers. They're supposed to be aware of sex abuse, drug abuse. We're not trained to do that. None of us have been really trained, or very few have been really trained. And although it's no longer good enough to, you know, call kids by their surname and just go in and lecture to them and walk out, you have to know about them now. And it actually, there's an awful lot more pressure, I would feel, on teachers than there used to be.
What's the nicest remark anybody ever made to you in relation to your books?
Well, the funniest one would be when I was getting off the Dart at Kilbarrack Station one Monday morning. There was this guy, I was going to say kid, but he was in his 20s at this stage, but I used to teach him. And he was getting on the train, hadn't seen him in years, and he just said, "Oh, Mr. Doyle, how are you?" He said, "I read The Commitments, it was the best book I ever read." I thought that was a lovely thing to hear on a Monday morning, you know, and I was just going through the station and there was a tap on my shoulder and it was him again. He said, "It was the only book I ever read."
So how are you reacting to fame now? How are you coping with this?
Well, it's actually quite easy. I mean, the only time I never gave it much thought until I was shortlisted for or rather I wasn't, but the book, The Snapper, was shortlisted for the Booker Prize, and suddenly the phone started hopping. And it began to worry me then, because my number had got out, obviously, and I couldn't pick up the phone without knowing whether it was going to be my mother or a friend or somebody from the Herald or something, you know. And I began to feel it was a bit invasive. But on the Friday after the shortlist was announced, I was coming back from the chipper. We were too lazy to make the dinner, so I was coming back from the chipper, and I began to feel a bit odd. And between opening up the back door of the house and getting into the kitchen, I was doubled over in absolute agony. I've never encountered anything like it. It turned out I had a kidney stone, which it's not serious as such, but at the time, the only logical conclusion was that I was dying. I was convinced it had to be. The only thing that could have possibly happened was that I was going to die. So I was hauled into the Mater Hospital anyway, and I was lying on a couch. I'd just got a painkiller, and I was waiting for it to work, you know, just trying to remember the Hail Mary or something like that. And then this guy just parted the curtain, and he was drunk as a skunk, and he had a bandage around his arm, and I suspect there were several fingers missing because there was blood pumping out of him. And he had a piece of paper and a pen. He said, "Rodney, any chance of an ill autograph?" You know? And there was no chance at all of an old autograph, I can tell you. But more worryingly, somehow somebody from, I can't remember which newspaper, found out about it and phoned my wife the following day in the morning time. Now, I could have had cancer, I could have been dead, I could have been a victim of a crash. As it was, I was fine, you know, just a bit upset, so to speak. But, you know, I just thought it was terrible. I thought she could have been grieving or celebrating, depending on her point of view. And this guy phones up and says, you know, "What's wrong with him?" And at that stage I decided, well, this is getting a bit much, so I decided that, to give serious thought to separating my public and my private life. So since then, if you like, if I am interviewed, I won't let anybody into the house. It's not for reclusive. I'm not Howard Hughes or anything like that. It's just that we decided to separate our
You'd
private and public life.
You'd find it difficult to do so. What about the people who do say to you, why is there so much bad language in the commitments and in the snapper and so on? Why
well,
is
it's easy to answer, really, and it's just, from my point of view, as far as I'm concerned, that is the way that people talk. Not all people, granted. In the van, again, Jimmy Senior's wife holds a one-woman war against bad language in the house. She's constantly telling them not to use bad language. Even Jimmy Senior makes his effort. He puts a square box up on the kitchen table, and fivepence goes into the square box every time anybody uses bad language. But so not all of the characters, and his sidekick Bimbo, who operates the van with him, very, very rarely uses bad language. I think, if I'm not mistaken, he uses the bad word once, and that's what the day he's made redundant. And I think fair play to him, he's entitled to. And so it's the way that these people talk. I mean, I remember I was thinking about it one time, and I was getting off the Dart in Killester Station, where I, near where I live.
The Dart a lot in Killester.
I do. I actually get on it as well. But there were two middle-aged women just in front of me, and I was walking up towards the RTE1 roundabout where I live, and they were chatting away. They weren't particularly venomous, so they weren't having a row or anything, but they used the word that rhymes with duck and variations on it 57 times in the 9 minutes or so it takes me to get home. And these were two middle-aged women. They may have also been classed as middle class. I don't know. These sort of divisions confuse me sometimes. But I mean, it is very, very common.
It is endemic.
Yeah. But again, in Paddy Clark, it's not, because it doesn't fit. The next book I'm writing, I've only a vague idea of what I'll do yet, but it'll be modern, so there'll probably be bad language in it. Yet it'll be from the point of view of a woman who probably wouldn't use bad language very often, so there probably won't be all that much in it. But I will use it. If I think the characters use bad language, I will use it. I don't do it to shock or anything like that.
Paddy Clark, ha ha ha, great title for a book. Paddy Clark, ha ha ha. It's about a child observing the breakup of a marriage and all of that, and playing with other kids and so on. You obviously have a very good ear for dialogue. There's a huge amount of straightforward dialogue in the book.
Not as much as in previous books. It's actually a longer book than my others, but it's less pages, because the pages are more packed, because there's far less dialogue. One of the reasons I set it in 1968 is because I wanted a challenge. After finishing The Van, I decided I wouldn't do anything else like that again, because it would become a bit repetitive and it would become a bit monotonous, and I wanted to see if I could do something totally different. So I decided to write it in the first person. I did this, I did that, even though it runs the risk of being, mistaken for autobiography. And I also decided to set it in 1968 for the challenge of trying to recreate not just the world, but the way people spoke in 1968. And basically I was chancing my arm, because, who remembers dialogue from 1968?
Yeah, there was one piece of dialogue I noticed. One kid says to the other, that'd be real cool. Was that in 60?
Oh, it would have been to a certain extent. The word groovy I was tempted to use, but I decided it was a bit of a cliche. But I think cool would have been there, yeah.
Really? Was it in 60?
Well, maybe somebody would disagree with me.
I'll take line 4 then. All right, then. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hello, line 4.
Hello, Gay.
Yes, sir. Good evening.
How are you?
I'm all right.
Victor Clare, Jobestown here in Tallinn.
Yeah.
I'd just like to, 2 questions for you. One for Roddy. The first one is, Roddy, why wasn't The Snapper released as a general film? For the simple reason that everybody I know who watched it said it was absolutely brilliant compared to The Commitments. It was much funnier and much better.
True.
And the second question is one for Gay. Gay, can you swing RTE to show it? Because all my friends videoed it, and they either missed 5 minutes at the start or 5 minutes at the end. So if you can swing it. And I'd just like to say to Roddy that it's right.
I will have a word with Mr. Bob Collins as soon as possible.
Great.
Not even tomorrow morning to see
That's
will he buy it.
great.
Because we don't know who owns it. Well, you know who owns it and so on. So there's no reason why we shouldn't show it and buy it and so on.
Yeah.
So the other one, thank you very much indeed, caller.
No
You're
problem.
obviously an
Thanks very
admirer.
much, Gay.
Okay, God bless.
The other question is easy to answer. The film was actually made for television, and Stephen Frears and myself, particularly Stephen, who had more of the visual side, he was the director, deliberately said, well, we'll make it for television. We won't make it like for television, but if it's any good, we'll release it for cinema. So when it was finished, he was invited to show it at Cannes. Now, the problem from his point of view and from our point of view is that when you blow it up onto a big screen, that we thought it mightn't look good, it would look a bit grainy. Sometimes I think I'd prefer to watch football on a small screen rather than a big screen in a pub, because it's very bad, the quality is terrible. But as it turns out, it was shown in Cannes last Friday and it looked great. So I had veto on, and Stephen had, the two of us had veto on whether it would get a cinema release, but we've both lifted that veto, so there is a good chance that it will be shown in the cinema now.
Very good. You tell me that you don't go to theatre.
Well, I don't very often, no. At the moment, it's virtually impossible to get into town at 8 o'clock because we're putting the kids to bed, you know, so it's virtually impossible. We can't do it.
But with all your money, sure, you should have a team of babysitters and nurses and nannies and everything else.
Yeah, but they're hopeless. We have them, you know, but they're hopeless. None of them speak English either, so if I have a preference, when we do go out, if I have a preference, it's for the cinema every time. I enjoy it far more. I find the plays, a good play is excellent. Paul Mercier's play Studs, I would go to that every night for the rest of my life quite happily and love it. I would, quite honestly. I've seen it about 11 or 12 times, and if I knew it was on in Dublin tomorrow, I would go. I'd go out of my way to go. But very rarely do I encounter a play like that. And the last 2 times I went to the theatre, there were 2 intermissions, you know, and I hate intermissions. When I'm watching a film, I like to forget I'm actually at the pictures. I like to immerse myself in it completely. And it's part of the enjoyment of the thing. And at the theatre, I'm not allowed to do that. I know that actors need a rest, but a play I went to maybe the Christmas before last, which lasted an hour and a half, I was the best part of 3 hours in the theatre because there were these intermissions all the time. And obviously, the actors need a rest, but I think the real thing was for us to go into the bar and buy a drink. And,
of course.
I sort of resented that. I'd rather watch a play and then go to a bar and have a real drink, you know, so I don't go.
Are you asking yet? No, you've no question yet. No, we're waiting for you. Have you question? Oh, your friend over there in the green. Up the back. Right up the back. Up the back. Right up there. Yes, ma'am.
Paddy, I'd like to ask you, who was your inspiration for Jimmy Rabbit Sr.? Was it based on anyone in particular?
No, it wasn't based on anybody in particular at all. This is always a disappointing answer because none of the characters I've written about so far, including Paddy Clark, who many people would assume is me. None of them have been based on real people at all. Although there are women in Kilbarrack who maintain that Mr. Farrell from Brown Bread was their husband. But I deny that, you know. I have to.
For legal reasons, amongst others, yeah. Tell us another story that you remember from kids or people.
Well, the best story, the thing that really convinced me that I wanted to teach for a living, I sort of drifted into it because having got a general degree, there's not a lot else you can do. So I did the H-dip and I went to Greendale, which was around the corner from me, and I was there a couple of days and really I hadn't a clue what I was at. I'd actually come from sweeping the streets in London. I was doing that for the summer into this place. And I didn't know what I was doing. I'd never raised my voice in my life, really, you know. And I got this, when teachers were absent, I was given substitution, you know. And I got this list from the vice principal at the time, Patrick Potts, and on it was, you know, first class was a class called 2-7. And I nearly planked because I'd been mauled alive by 2-1 the day before, you know. So I went down to the room, and there was this gang of... they weren't skinheads as such, but there was ska music was very popular at the time, and they had these haircuts that were like tennis balls. Do you remember those haircuts? And there's a gang of about 15 of these lads, and you know, the equivalent girls, all of whom at the time were called Jacqueline. That was the big name in those days. This is 79 now. Yes. And I let them in, and they ignored me. You know, they got into their places as usual, and they ran around the place and were going mad. And I was drawing a map of France or something on the board, and I decided, well, there's no point. They weren't doing anything wrong anyway, you know. So there was no point in trying to, you know. I just didn't have it at the time. I couldn't hack it at all in those days. So I just sat back and watched. You know, I was being paid for it was money for jam really, so long as the noise didn't get too loud and the principal wasn't walking by. So, but there was this little guy in between them who was obviously different from the others. He'd been obviously scoured with a Brillo pad going out that morning, his cheeks, you know, and his quiff was perfect. He looked a bit like Fireman Sam. I don't know if you've ever seen him with that hair. And he had a full stencil case and a geometry set with all the stuff and no scratches on the box and a set of markers, and he was protecting them, you know, from other marauding skinheads and elbowing his way. And there's this guy behind him who tapped him on the shoulder. And he turned around and said, "What?" He says, "Is your ma a prostitute?" I said, "She is not." He says, "Well, tell her I want me money back." This is not nice. This is not nice. But at the time, I thought it was... other people apparently have heard it as well, but I thought at the time that was the funniest thing I'd ever heard in my life. And it probably is. And it was that, I think, don't want to be too... pat about it. But I think it was roughly at that moment I said, this is what I want to do for a living. It had nothing to do with imparting information or leading kids into adulthood. It was just that.
Well done. You're staying with us for a while.
I will,
stay with us, John, in case we get another. Oh, you want another? One last one on line 3. Okay, line 3. Hello. Hello.
Hello. I'm
Yes, sir.
wondering if Roddy ever was ever frowned upon by any of the teachers in his school because of his language and his earrings.
Well, I've only one earring.
The earring?
Yeah, earring. No, I don't think so. There was the odd remark made about it, but nothing in the last 10 years or so. Nobody's noticed it. I've worn it since a long time before I was a teacher, but the only time I never wore it was the day I did the interview for the job. I couldn't find it. It was terrible.
And the bad language in the writing?
The bad language, no. The thing about staff rooms is if you go into a staff room, I mean, if you want some of the examples of the foulest language you're going to hear, go into a staff room at lunchtime. And so I'm actually quite tame compared to some of the people in my school.
Very good. Line what? Line 4. Line 4. I'll take line 4. Hello, line 4.
Yes, Roddy, my name is Peter Harris. As an Englishman, I thoroughly enjoy the commitments, what little bits I could actually understand. The second time, having lived here a couple of years, it's become a lot more understandable. I've heard they're making commitments too. Are you involved in that at all? And if so, what do you feel about it?
No, I'm not involved at all. The company that made the commitments have the right to make a sequel. I don't think it's a good idea, and I let it be known very early that I didn't want to be involved. I don't know if it's going to be made. It's been announced in the Evening Herald every 2 months for the last 2 years that it's being made. So I don't know, to be honest with you, whether it'll be made, and I only hope it isn't, because
you have nothing to do with it.
I won't have anything to do with it.
You can't stop it.
No, they had the right. The argument was put to me quite reasonably, I felt, after a while, that they were investing all the money into the commitments, and if it was successful, then they were entitled to, build on that. I don't like the idea, because I've only ever enjoyed one sequel in my life, and that was Godfather 2, which wasn't really a sequel at all. So I think it'll be I think it's a horrible notion. But then again, if they make it, they'll make it. But I think it'll be quite bad.
Very good. Thank you, caller. Right, we'll take a break. Roddy Doyle is staying with us. Give it a round of applause.
Nivea has just created the advanced Nivea Visage Liposome range. We could show you how liposomes carry active anti-aging agents into your skin, but would you be interested? We could even show you what they look like, but would you really care? We're sure that what you'd really rather see is the result. Naturally beautiful skin. So for naturally beautiful face care today and tomorrow, Nivea Visage.
A spoonful of Fibrina mixed with orange juice or milk gives you as much fibre as 3 bowls of bran flakes. Taken regularly, Fibrina can help reduce cholesterol. Fibrina, the natural alternative.
If you've tried to give up smoking, you know how difficult it can be. Now, Nicorette Gum can help you beat your craving. Nicorette Gum is available in Ireland from your pharmacist without prescription.
Think I'd invest and do my best to make the future right for you. Maybe visit Mary in New York just to see how you do. Think what a lot of little life can do. What a lot of little life can do for you. Think what a lot can do.
Hi, I'm Linda Martin. Last year, we Irish spent £1,500 million on imported food and drink products and supported foreign jobs at the expense of jobs here at home. The Mill Street Eurovision Food Committee asks you to make the right choice. Keep Ireland working and support jobs at home.
Ivomec Super Injection for Cattle. All the power of Ivomec plus added fluke control. Ivomec Super Injection for Cattle. The new name in parasite control.
Luxury new development opened this weekend. Cavan Development's new 3, 4 and 5 bedroom show homes at Maple Manor, Johnstown Road, Cabinteely Village, open from 11 a.m.
Have you caught new corn pops? They taste just like crunchy popcorn. Here are new from Kellogg's. The great taste of crunchy popcorn. They're from Kellogg's. Corn pops, corn pops, corn pops. They're great as part of this nutritious breakfast. Just like crunchy popcorn. You gotta catch new corn pops.
Who offers the best airfares to London? Ryanair.
Travel to London from as little as £29 each way.
Today's best bread today for whippersnappers from Brennan's, the family bakers.
Now, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Before I go any further, the things that happen on this show. Last week on the show, Brendan O'Carroll, he was talking with Charlie Swan, and he was telling us about the time that he bought a horse for 340 quid. And he gave it to a trainer, whose name was Flynn, he said. It was a funny story, although it wasn't so funny. I don't believe there ever was a horse or 340 pounds changed hands. But unfortunately, he said derogatory things about a man named Flynn, who was a horse trainer. There is a man, Patrick Joseph Flynn, of Ballingarra, Rathgormack, County Waterford, a decent, honest, reliable man of integrity who is a horse trainer for some of the best people in the business. He has 50 horses at training. Needless to say, during the week, talk about you being slagged. He has been got at in a very serious way, and he's a lovely man and a very nice man and an undemanding man, and he just asked me to say, please, there was nobody called Flynn in Brendan O'Carroll's life, and there was no horse. But he certainly was not talking last week about Patrick Joseph Flynn of Ballingarra, Rathgormack, County Waterford, who is extremely highly thought of, and not surprisingly, in the racehorse business. In fact, one of his horses broke the standing record in Cheltenham this year. Broke the all-time record in Cheltenham this year. So I want to assure Mr. Flynn that I and Brendan O'Carroll and RTE and the Late Late Show, we apologise to you most sincerely and to your family if we caused you any embarrassment. It's just one of those things that now and then happens. So there you are. Now, my friend, my next guests, one from Ballynabuck, Dingle, in the Kerry Gaeltacht. That's where he's from. The other all the way from Australia. And they've been christened the Guns N' Roses of Irish music. And they were main guests with us on our very, very successful Sharon Shannon tribute show, the video of which, incidentally, I am told, is walking out of the shops. Walking out of the shops it is, so popular was it. Now, they released their long-awaited debut album next Monday, and it's aptly called Mehel. And with a little dart from that, would you welcome, please, Steve Cooney and Seamus Begley. Over here. Yet again, the question is asked, how do they know when to finish? Ah, 'tis a secret. Steve Cooney, Seamus Begley. And they're playing a once-off gig with special friends now, tomorrow evening in Whelan's of Wexford Street. The launch of their new album, Mehel, is in O'Shea's Hotel on Monday next, and I would wager that there might be a few darts of music in that as well. Now, my friends, just over 3 years ago, we introduced to you the Holton family, Liam and Mary and their children on the Late Late Show. They had Claire, Therese and Mairead, and their twins, Eilish and Katie. Nothing extraordinary about that, you may say, except that Eilish and Katie